Welcome back. We are talking this session about restorative mediation. This is the fourth restorative skill in our series. And we are starting with, classroom circles. Then we talked about affective language, statements and questions. So we introduced actually the restorative question in that session, and we just keep using them over and over. And you're going to keep using them all the way to the end of this sequence, all the way to the restorative conferencing. So those magic questions are what we're going to lean on in every single situation. So this little diagram just shows classroom circles happen for every kid and every classroom at a school. It's restorative. People just talk with affective language. When there's kind of low level, like classroom issue, pull somebody out to have a restorative chat. Then they come back in the classroom. So those are kind of the three things. And then today we're talking about mediations. And this is probably one of the most frequent things in schools. And technically speaking, a restorative mediation, conflict mediation is not exactly part of like the restorative practices work originally. It's kind of a separate like body of work, but in schools we kind of like have to have it. And I'm going to explain why we need it so much in schools. So if you look at those of you that have looked at multi-tiered system of support, you know that PBI was a three-tiered model of behavioral supports. And then we had RTI, that was a three-tiered model of academic supports. And then those two things came together, and together we created a multi-tiered system of support that was integrated. So we want kids to have academic and behavioral, social, emotional supports to the level that they need. So at tier 1, every student at every school should have, school-wide PIS, sort of social emotional learning program. Restorative practices would be the classroom circle. That's really what we're talking about, affective language. And then at tier 2, and that's where we are. So this is a tier 2 intervention that we're talking about. And tier 2 is small group instruction, as you know, either like counseling small group, academic small groups, any kind of self-management, like point sheets that kids carry around, that's an intervention, different kinds of accommodations in the classroom. And then the restricted tier 2 are the chats that we talked about last week, and mediation and circles. So next week, we're talking about circles next time. So restorative mediation kind of fits, just those of you that kind of like to think about where does this fit in the school. It's not every student that would need this, so it's a tier 2 intervention. So restorative practices, it comes from restorative justice, came to the US, really kind of got more popularized kind of in the 90s, around the time that PBIS became more needed, I guess. And it was all in response to the Gun-Free Schools Act. Students, basically that school to prison pipeline, we changed the laws, and so more and more students became incarcerated. And certainly, definitely more African American, disproportional discipline also for Native Americans, and students with disabilities. So certain groups were disproportionately represented in school discipline. And unfortunately, the Gun-Free Schools Act made school behavior punishable in court. Used to be when we get in trouble, when we were kids, they would call our parents and we'd be in trouble. And it was never where like you could get arrested right off of school. I mean, pretty rarely. And that's something that we did in the Gun-Free Schools Act. We didn't realize that we were doing that. And so we created this huge problem, and in came positive behavior interventions and supports to try to prevent some of that. And then in came restorative practices around the same time. So they are both needed, and they are wonderful for schools, and they're both absolutely integral to what we're trying to do to create positive school climate and improve behavior. So restorative practices, it's really a set of skills, some tools that you could use to build community in a school and also to respond to problems. And And so it's kind of, we've been talking building community, kind of in those green triangles, remember, like the community building stuff. And now we're talking right now about responding to problems. We also know that restorative practices is grounded in some work by Maslow, talked about in order for us to get to that self-actualization where every teacher is asked to teach at that very top of the pyramid, right? When someone's needs are, they can be creative and collaborative and all of those things. But if we have kids that physiological needs aren't met, safety needs are not met, belonging that, we're not going to be able to get to where we need them to be in order to learn. And what we're talking about now is that belongingness part. So physiological, we know that we're trying to meet that, you know, with some of our parent liaisons and school social workers, and our communities really work to meet needs for students. Safety needs in the school are really met a lot by positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, where kids will say after schools have been implementing for, hey, I feel safe at the school, from bullying and violence and things like that. But there's also that relational safety too that then restorative practices can bring in with community circles. Belongingness happens even more so with community building that you do with restorative practices. And so today we're going to talk about mediation, because that's really about our relationships and how can we keep kids in relationships with each other. Everything I'm talking about probably could work for adults too. So this is where we're at, talking about some of the foundational pieces. We also have looked at the social discipline window in each training, that we're trying to be in the with quadrant. And I'm going to explain how that works in a mediation. It's in the prep work. It's in informing everyone what you're doing, why you're doing it, gaining their agreement. So we're not going to make someone do any of these processes. That wouldn't be restorative to force anyone into anything. So that would be doing something to someone. But letting them like never talk about things, never talk about problems, that would be neglectful, right? And we also don't do things for people. That's permissive. We want to do things with them. So what is restorative mediation? Mediation, as you know, it's really that process to resolve conflict between two people, and there's harm on both sides. So a lot of the restorative practices work, like circles and conferences, is the idea is like there was harm done, usually on one side. But sometimes it's more complicated that, and you're trying to figure it out. The mediation is really like person A, person B. And so that's how it's kind of specific. And this is really, I would probably most common situation in schools is just generally pure conflict. Now, I will caution you, you all know in schools, a lot of the time when you get a complaint, a kid, they'll say he or she is bullying me, or you'll get a call from a parent. That my child's being bullied by so-and-so. So sometimes you don't know what you're dealing with, and you don't know if it's appropriate for mediation. So a bullying situation where harm is on one side and there's an unequal power would not be appropriate for the model that I'm talking about today, if that makes sense. This is two people gossiping about each other, two guys that get in a fight. And it's really the most common thing that we have in schools, I think. So really the difference with restorative mediation to conflict mediation, that can be kind of a legal term, or like a legal mediation where people are divvying up assets or negotiating on something. This is not a negotiation. This is really, the focus is on the harm done and how it's impacted people. You will make a plan to keep it from happening again and that kind of stuff, but it's really not about that. It's about this process that we're going to talk about how people were impacted, what their needs were, and we're going to learn how to cooperate. We're going to repair harm and restore the relationship. So a little different than just another type of mediation. So that's kind of where that's coming from. So here are the restorative questions that you essentially are going to use. Now, when I was taught mediation, I literally was like in a training for restorative practices, and later I asked the trainer, I said, well, what about two people who are in conflict? And he said, oh, that's a mediation, that's different. So I was like, well, how is it different? So I've done like digging and looking, and basically in this field, some people just grab the question cards and just like some people will only ask just questions to both people. So that's one thing you could do if you're doing a mediation, because the side 2 of the question cards are for the person who was harmed. So essentially in a mediation and 2 people in a conflict, they are both harmed in that sense. You could simply use the restorative question side 2 and go through that. And the other thing that's different about a restorative mediation is that you use rephrasing. So you ask the student to repeat back what the other person said. That is not in any of the other kind of protocols that we do. And there's a reason for that, right? It's equal, it's slow down, we're checking for understanding, and that's just how the mediation works best. And that's something I've been doing since I was a brand new social. I remember being an intern in Long Beach, California, and learning how to do that with 2 third graders who were fighting. Well, what did he say? Can you repeat that back? So it's an old skill. So you can do a lot of different things. If you forget everything that we talk about, just grab your restorative questions, ask the kids the questions, but ask them to repeat back. So question number 1, what happened? Ask Johnny to answer. And then you ask Jason, what did Johnny say? Okay. And now can you tell me what happened? And then Johnny, what did Jason say? Right? You take each question, they repeat it back. So that is one way to do it. I, though, have, to make it easier, have developed a script for you to follow that you can take with you. And it's going to be, I'm going to show you where to get it, but you'll be able to load it off of my website, lauramoyman.com. And I'll show you at the end where you can get that and a lot of other resources. So these are the questions. This is the first tool that I'm going to teach you how to use, the orange one, the prep work for a restorative conversation, and the actual mediation. So why do we have to do prep work first? We haven't done it actually up until now. And our other kind of skills, our other practices, you did not do a full kind of preparing thing. So we are going to learn how to do that because you're going to need to know it for every single process from now on. You have to do less prep for mediations than you do for circles, and less for circles than you're going to need to do for conferences. So let's talk about what that's going to look like, prep work. So prep work simply means that you meet with people before, individually, before you're going to pull them together in any kind of dialogue. You need to also determine, is this the appropriate kind of, I think it's a mediation, but then you call the kids in and you find out it's not, or, oh my gosh, the entire class is involved in this. We have to do a whole circle. It's not just 2 people, right? So you have to figure out what is the right kind of restorative conversation or meeting that we're going to do. And then before you start, you make sure everybody is A, willing to participate, and B, they are going to be able to follow guidelines. And so the guidelines that we've been working with ever since we started with circles was things like listen to other people in the group, right? We're not going to interrupt. We're going to listen from the heart. We're going to speak from the heart. You're probably going to want some sort of agreement around confidentiality. So that's kind of up to you and what they want to do, like what kind of agreements you want to make before you start. So that's what the prep work is. It seems simple, and it seems like maybe a step that you might like to skip. But let me tell you a couple horror stories. I can't tell you how many times when we were starting to do this work in my last district where, you'd get 2 kids, they had gotten into a fight at lunch, got pulled into the office, they were sitting in 2 different rooms, and the assistant will try to bring them together and facilitate a conversation to resolve the conflict, and the fight would like reignite. Happen all the time until we figured out, wait a minute, we need to be calm first, and we need to get some agreements first. I know another situation, one of our middle schools, they had the kids were in a fight, tons of conflict. And so they called the parents in, and the parent just no preparation for what kind of meeting they were having, no preparation on any kind of agreements. The parents came in, the parents saw each other, got on in a full fight, fist fight on the floor in the office. So preparation is key. In fact, they say that you do like 2 hours of prep for every hour that you're going to be in school. Like minimum. This may not be, of course, this is the lower end, like a mediation. It could be a lot less than that, but let me kind of show you what you would need to do to make sure it could go quicker. And if you're wondering why we didn't do prep work for the restorative chat, you actually did prep work last session about how a facilitator would come to the door and call the kid out and go over the questions before bringing the teacher in. That was prep work. So you've already done it. It's just asking the questions and seeing if they're willing to go back, right? And the reason the teacher didn't get prepped is because there's an assumption that at a school using that process of a restorative chat, you would have trained your teachers in advance what kind of questions are going to be asked and that they would be ready for that meeting. And if they are not ready, they would just say, time out, we need to set up a separate time to do this. It's not going to be a fast one, right? So we essentially did do very, very minimal prep work for the restorative chat, and on purpose to make it easier to do, so we're more likely to do it, so it's smooth. But anything beyond that, you do need to do some prep work. Individually, each person, why are we meeting? Well, I understand that there's been a conflict between you and and you kind of, this is, we want to move forward. We want to support you guys and making things right, that sort of thing. So it's not a shame and blame. You're really clear about that. You tell the question to ask and you stick to the questions. That's justice, right? Who's going to be there? No surprises. Where is it going to be? What time is it going to be? So that's kind of how that works. In fact, if you're meeting with them, you can ask, is there a time that would work best for you? That would be fine. It's not a punishment, and then you decide if you need to contact the parents or not. We work out all kinds of problems between kids without parents being involved, but if it's a bigger issue and you want their support, that's absolutely to call them, involve them in that way. So that's what you're doing when you're meeting with them. So the reason that we prep work, a lot of it is one of the principles in restorative practices is fair process. And what they say, really, this is probably just as important as that social discipline window, is that people need to be engaged, like involved in decisions. We need to explain things to people. Why is this happening? And then expectation clarity. We need to be super clear about rules, like what, when, where, who's involved. So this is fair. So prep work, you're involving the person, but all the different people involved, they're all going to be engaged in the process, going to know why. They're going to have some clarity about like, what's the guidelines going to be? Is she going to be able to make fun of me again? Like that. So they're going to know. That's the fair process. And they always cite the Harvard Business Review study from 97 that talks about individuals are most likely to trust and cooperate freely with systems, whether or not they themselves win or lose by those systems when fair process is observed. So we want them to make a change even if they're not loving it, right? Because they're going to be engaged in this process. And that's why we do that, why we do this whole prep work phase. So the prep for restorative conversation, if you go to lauramoyman.com and you go to the resources, it's right on the top and you can download it. But like in a training where they don't, you don't hand out the worksheets to your kids yet, when you're teaching, we're not going to hand it out yet because I want you to kind of see the steps. Now you're going to maybe decide, look, this is too much for the situation. I can do it a lot quicker. All you're going to need to do is just make sure you've kind of like covered that territory. But essentially, the first thing that you do when you're doing prep work is find out who's involved. Find out, like, get the information. So one time, I was at a middle school. These are all different schools, actually. I was at a middle school, and an incident. They were doing a project with glue guns, and one of the kids thought it would be funny to squirt his friend in the cheek glue gun. And it was horrific, screaming and crying and this like burn scar on his face. The whole classroom was chaos and parents were beside themselves. It was horrible. So the administrators, they did met with like the families. They got these kids to kind of like mend the relationship, all with great restorative processes. So then they went and we, and I helped them prepare. Yeah, you need to do circle with the class too. And we'll talk about that next session, circles, restorative goals. They were really impacted. It was terrifying, the whole thing. Plus, they needed to talk about like being on task and not being off task. We're supposed to be doing stuff. And so they did this circle. Well, in the circle, it was a disaster. There was like kids like laughing and not participating, and the whole thing kind of like disintegrated. I wasn't there, but that's what they said. So they later they called in somehow. I think one of the kids said something like, "Hey, you should talk to those two guys." So these other two guys, what it turns out, there was two other boys that had egged the whole thing on and had bet one of the boys, "I dare you, I'm going to give you $5 if you're going to squat on his face." So what had happened was they didn't get all the information, and they were trying to repair and heal a situation. We have these people there that were just eaten up by shame and guilt, and everyone's trying to move on without them being part of this process. Had they asked the right question, and the question is, who else needs to be here? That's the question. Then they would have come and they could have been part of the prep work rather than just showing up in class. We're gonna do a circle. These kids had something to say. They had a lot on their minds and on their shoulders, and so that is why you want to start with who needs to be here. And we also want to make sure everybody's calm, right? If it's a fight, we all calm down. Number 2, you meet individually with people that are going to come. You ask the restorative questions. You just make sure they know everyone's going to be answering these questions when we talk. That's all, okay? And then the next person, you do that too. So in the mediation phase, it's probably just 2 people, right? And I have people do prep work in the hallway. Hey, I want to, meet with you guys. I heard there's a concern. Would willing? These are the questions we would ask, and then you do the same with the other person. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge meeting for something like this. It depends. Then you just evaluate readiness. And these things all need to be present. You need to make sure they're willing. You need to make sure that they're willing to follow the guidelines. So that's the first thing that you do. I've been in circles with 40 people with a master facilitator, Jonathan Bradley, and they kept getting riled up. These were parents, and he kept bringing them back to the guidelines. You agreed. One at a time, we agreed, right? Can everybody follow the guidelines? So every time it would get a little nutty, he'd bring them back. So they have to agree to the guidelines, or you have nothing to reel them in if things go a little bit, get rocky during the process. So they're agreeing to follow the guidelines, listen to people, not interrupt, speak from the heart, confidentiality. And then you ask, are people able to take responsibility for their role in the conflict? So if it is mutual, if this is both people did harm, then it's appropriate for a mediation. That means both people did something. If they both did something, they need to be able to say what they did. You may need to draw that out in your prep work a little bit by asking follow-up questions. So this is not a stick to the script necessarily conversation. You're going to kind of talk about those questions, but you can say, well, what else maybe happened, and what else, You don't want a lot of secrets before you go into a mediation where you're shocked, right? You want to get out what happened, and it might take a little bit of sleuthing, but we're good at that in schools, right? So everybody's willing to meet. We're going to follow the guidelines, and I take responsibility for my part. If they don't, do not bring them together. Simple, right? Then, does anyone else need to be there? Now, typically, mediation is 2 people. I've seen like maybe 3. I know my husband is a school administrator, and he recently had 3 girls in his office that were having some, I think one person thought she was getting bullied and getting left out. And then it was just like more communication. The other 2 thought she didn't want to be their friend, something like that. And so he just facilitated this using the questions, and everybody just shared. It was fine after that. So that was a low level, not, kind of just a mediation. And so sometimes someone else maybe can come, and that's fine. Anyone else that comes, purpose, they're invited, let them know what the questions are going to be. Are they going to follow the guidelines, right? And then determine if this is for sure appropriate for a mediation. So harm is on both sides. If you find out something bullied and it's not on both sides, you're going to do a circle or something else instead. Or if it was just harm, in general, and hurt someone else's feelings or property or whatever, then they would come to it and they would need to say what happened, how they impacted others, right? And then the person harmed also have that opportunity. So a little different than what we're talking about now. So this is the script, okay? So the assumption is I did my prep work, I have my people together, right? I have person A, Abigail, and I have person B, Bianca. Okay, I have Abigail and Bianca. They're here. Now the script is like, what do I say first? What do I say next? Scripts are actually not a bad thing to have in restorative practices. I've mentioned this before. Often they will literally read. The facilitator will just look down and read in circles and in conferences, and there's a reason, and that is because it gets people looking at each other. It makes you not part of the thing. I know as a mental health person, as a school social worker, and I did at least 1 or 2 years as a middle school counselor, there is that, like, it's wonderful to be needed, but you also have that sense of like you're doing your job if they don't need you, right? Restorative practices facilitators, they call them like circle keepers, that it's not about you. And the more you can like disappear and let them do it, the better. The more that they own this process, actually, it's even better for you. The moment you start feeling like weight on your shoulders, like I have to solve this, you're actually not being restorative, because we as a community own this problem. We've been allowing it to happen. They've been allowing it to happen, right? They need to fix it, right? So, and if they need support from me, I'm there, So we're going to bring them together, and it is okay to read from script. First thing you're going to do when you get the script, you can have it in front of you. The scripts are one page. That's all it is, okay? First thing, you're going to say something like, I understand there's been some conflict between you guys. We want to talk about it, bring it out in the open, and we want to work to resolve it. We're not blaming, we're not shaming anyone, and you're each going to have an opportunity to share your perspective and make a plan. After you kind of state your purpose, again, stating our purpose is because that's fair process, and when you do the prep work, you tell each kid, you say, I'm on both of your sides. Guidelines, these are just some I think would be good, that we're sharing what's true from our perspective. I tend to not let them like talk about other people. I try not to. We're going to talk about ourselves in this, and so we're not bringing in other people's names unless they need to be here. They need to be here. We need to invite them. Okay, we're not speaking for people. Speak for yourself, your perspective, and then you listen from the heart. Wait for your turn. You're going to have a turn. We're not interrupting people. Listen fully. Try not to make, actions or be judgmental. And then confidentiality seems like a good one. Kind of what said here stays here. That can help people be a little more vulnerable. But if you think of some other guidelines, they think of something, add it. Absolutely add it. Okay, everybody, we agree on these. All right. So first, we're going to ask these questions. We're going to start with Abigail. We're going to ask Abigail, in your words, what happened? And then Abigail talks. Abigail speaks a little bit. And then you turn to Bianca and you say, Bianca, can you summarize or say in your own words or paraphrase? Can you say back what Abigail just said? And then they'll say, well, she said, you know, because they totally disagree. That's just what's going to happen. If you want, I've heard some people say, start with the most upset person. Let them go first, just because it kind of sets the tone for the energy, the detail. Get it out there, you know. Let them start. And then Bianca repeats back what Abigail said. And often you have to coach them through this because she's going to want to initially like argue while she's repeating back. And you just put them on track. Okay, what did Abigail say? You're going to tell your side in a sec, Bianca, but finish. What did Abigail say? Is there anything else? You need to, you can say, Abigail, did she say, you know, capture about what you said? That, yes, okay. Bianca, in your words, what happened? And then Bianca like talks and, you know, says, well, what Abigail said wasn't right. And I have had a couple times where we had to go back and forth a little bit. And essentially what you're doing in a mediation is you're creating two distinct narratives and you're putting them together to one narrative that they both are like, yeah, that's what happened, you know. And it's usually a bit of what both people are saying. It's just they're two different perspectives. And then we say, Abigail, what were you thinking and feeling at the time when that happened? And then she'll tell all of her feeling words, all of her needs, all that's kind of coming out. And then I say, Bianca, can you say what was Abigail thinking and feeling at the time? And then she'll briefly list them. She was angry, she was frustrated. And then Abigail, did she capture? Okay, all right. Bianca, what were you thinking and feeling at the time? Then she lists, and then we ask Abigail to repeat and check for understanding. And same, what impact did this have on you? We're going to talk about that. Okay. Impact, anything else? Okay. And this impact question tends to be the beginning of empathy. So when I bring kids together, they're often not sorry. Sometimes in the prep work, you can get them to sorry, to feeling bad. It's kind of those follow-up questions, the digging, getting more information. Then you kind of get sometimes, yeah, you know, a little bit. But the real like empathy piece comes when they hear the other person's story. Do you remember we talked about the neurology behind like the fastest way that like humans will feel empathy is when we hear someone else's story? Well, that's what you have in a situation. You're going to have empathy because they're going to start to hear someone's story. So the more you can like get that person prepared to be succinct and clear in advance to nail down the story accurately, the better. So Abigail tells her story, you know, how the impact that it had on her. And then I say, Bianca, can you repeat it back? And then I'll ask, anything else, Abigail? Did she capture it? Okay. Now, Bianca, can you say the impact that this has had on you? And then she'll speak. Okay, and we're listening. And I say, Abigail, can you repeat what Bianca said? Anything else, Bianca, you want to add to that? Okay, so it's kind of this back and forth, back and forth. And you can say, is there anything else that we need to know? You know, that kind of thing. Anything else you guys want to add? Okay, now we get into the solution. We're making a plan now. And the last one is, what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And we'll ask both of them both a chance to contribute. Now, the difference here on this last one, we're making a plan, is you start writing it down. You can have chart paper, you can type, you can write it on paper in front of them. Jot down what they're saying. Well, I don't want her talking to my boyfriend anymore. She just needs to stop calling me that name, or I don't want her to roll her eyes. Okay? So whatever, we're making some agreements, you just jot them down. And then you together collaboratively look it over and see, okay, what of these do we want to change? What do we want to keep? So that part is going to be that plan. Let's take a look at what we've charted. Is there anything people want to add? Anything you want to change? And of course, this is fair process too, right? We want everybody's input. If someone's like, I can't do it, I won't do it, right? That's not work. I've had people say, okay, I will tell my friends to stop making fun of them. Like I've actually kids like to get their friends under control who are being mean or whatever. And so it's really kind of interesting that they feel they have the power to do that, but many kids do. And so you could get that list kind of what everybody's going to do, and it's all written down. Now, a lot of people write it and then they sign it. And that can be really powerful too, to have that. Not that I hold it over someone's head and put it in their permanent record or something like that, but it's really powerful in the same way that we're agreeing to the guidelines. We're also agreeing to this, we need to follow through. So once we're all in agreement, then you talk about like, what is this next week going to look like? So yeah, we made all these like things we're going to do, but how is it going to look different? Okay, yeah, because when I go into PE and we have lockers next to each other, maybe I could do this. You know, just like really the practical, how is it actually going to look? Then you say, when are we going to check in? So the follow-up date should be within a week or two. I can tell you that I have seen situations, one in particular, now this was like a higher end bullying situation that the school actually did some amazing things. So they did everything right. They had a plan, but then they never checked. And the situation got so bad that the girl ended up getting pulled to school by her parents. The school district got sued for not like protecting her. And it actually, had they just checked a week and then again like 2 weeks after that, right, they would have known that it wasn't getting better, or they could have like gotten something like under control or addressed the situation before it got out of control. So do not skip the checking back. You also may want to talk about, okay, if something happens, what are we going to do? We're going to set up a meeting again, you know, and then we're going to have to maybe do something else in addition to this, to these agreements. So that's that last step, is creating the plan. So what are your questions?
I really appreciate the process. I just think it might be a little long and involved for little ones like kindergarten students.
Mm-hmm.
So I think an abbreviated version maybe, or what would your suggestion be?
Well, I think that you would know how to abbreviate it, but it could be a little like, if they're usually with kindergartners, they're not like holding grudges that much. I mean, you just kind of pull them aside in the moment, and I would ask the questions, but in the developmentally appropriate way. Because I've done it with little kids. So you just say, well, what happened? And then they can repeat it. What did she say? They can do the repeating back and keep it really simple. So what happened? Who was hurt? How do we fix it? That's our like kinder level. I want to show everybody before we go where to find what we're talking about. So if you go to lauramoyman.com and you just go here to the resources tab, it's going to have free resources. So the first tool was the prep. And so it's right here. You download it right there. The second tool was how to facilitate the restorative mediation. So that's right here. So you would just download it. I also have other things like plan your own classroom circle, a worksheet. I did not share that before. I think I came up with it a little bit after we met. I have the virtual community circle with the coronavirus topic, some training, parent phone call script if you want to call home and, you know, make an ally of the parent. Circle guidelines, that's that pretty poster that you can do for your classroom. So anyway, those are all there for you. And I will be, you know, I just post stuff up here, but I don't leave them up here forever. I'll put like put them up and then I'll put something new up there. So definitely download what you want. All right, and then in the next session, we will be doing some practices and role plays on how to facilitate a restorative mediation. We'll see you then. Thanks.